In a quiet Ohio town, a black woman, a former pianist prodigy now running a piano repair shop, faces raw hostility from her white stepdaughter, a college student brimming with contempt. "You're just after his name and money," the young woman shouts, pointing accusingly at her. As the shop's dedicated owner, she endures harsh words, cold stares, and accusations of being a gold digger. Her talent and sacrifice is dismissed. Her humble life, lack of formal education, and skin color became targets of unfair judgment. Yet her unyielding grace suggests a deeper truth waiting to shift perspectives. Can her strength rewrite this story? Stay tuned to find out. If you're gripped by this tale, smash that subscribe button for our newest videos, and drop a comment with where you're watching from. You won't believe how this journey unfolds. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows of the piano shop, casting long golden bars across the worn wooden floor. June Lawson stood at the heart of her sanctuary, her calloused fingers tracing the chipped edge of a century-old Steinway. The air hummed with the faint resonance of strings, the scent of wood polish mingling with the earthiness of aged mahogany. Tools lay scattered on a workbench, tuning forks, felt hammers, a small jar of screws, each a testament to her craft. She adjusted a tuning pin, her movements precise, almost reverent, as if coaxing a forgotten melody from the instrument's soul. June's dark eyes, framed by faint lines of resilience, flickered with focus. This piano, bound for a local school, was more than wood and wire to her. It was a vessel of possibility, a gift for hands too young to know its worth. Her shop, tucked on a quiet street in the small Ohio town, was a world apart from the glittering concert halls of her youth. Once, June Lawson had been a name whispered, with awe, a Juilliard-bound prodigy whose fingers danced across keys with a fire that left audiences breathless. Now, at 42, her life was quieter, her ambitions tethered to this modest space where she restored pianos and gave them to children who dreamed in notes, but lacked the means. She wore a faded flannel shirt, its sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hair, pulled into a loose braid, gleamed under the shop's soft light. June didn't mind the simplicity. She had chosen this life, not for glory, but for purpose. The bell above the door chimed, pulling her from her work. Emma Carter, a 12-year-old with wide eyes and a crooked grin, slipped inside, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Miss June, is it ready yet?" Emma asked, her voice bright with anticipation. June smiled, her expression softening like a melody resolving into its final chord. "Almost, Emma. Come try it." She gestured to a small upright piano in the abaue corner, its varnish gleaming anew. Emma's fingers, hesitant but eager, pressed the keys, coaxing out a halting rendition of Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. June stood beside her, offering gentle corrections, her voice low and encouraging. "Keep your wrists soft," she said, guiding Emma's hands. "Let the music breathe." The girl beamed, her notes growing steadier, and June felt a quiet pride swell in her chest. This was why she stayed, why she poured her heart into these instruments. For kids like Emma, music wasn't just sound, it was a lifeline. As Emma played, June's thoughts drifted to the past. She saw her younger self, barely 20, standing under the bright lights of a New York stage, her fingers flying through Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The applause had been deafening, the scholarship to Juilliard a golden ticket. But then came Marcus, her little brother, his laughter silenced by the shadow of leukemia. June had walked away from the stage, from the promise of fame, to sit by his hospital bed, to hold his hand through the long nights. She didn't regret it. Marcus had been her anchor, her reason, and when he was gone, she'd built this shop, turning her love for music into something tangible, something that could lift others as it had once lifted her. The bell chimed again, sharper this time, and June looked up to see Thomas Bennett step inside. His graying hair was tousled, his tweed jacket slightly rumpled, but his smile carried the warmth of a man who found joy in small moments. Thomas, a music professor whose lectures on Beethoven drew crowds at the local university, had been June's partner in life for just over a year. Their marriage, born from shared evenings of music and quiet conversations, was a harmony she hadn't expected to find. "June," he said, his voice soft but tinged with unease. "Lena's coming home." "Today." June's fingers stilled on the workbench. Lena Bennett, Thomas's daughter, had been studying art in New York for 3 years. June had never met her, only heard stories of a bright, headstrong girl who painted with the same passion her father brought to music. But Thomas's tone carried a weight June recognized. A father's worry, a husband's caution. "She doesn't know about us," he admitted, his eyes searching hers. "I didn't want to tell her over the phone. It felt too big." June nodded, her heart tightening. She understood the delicacy of family, the way love could be tested by change. "We'll tell her together," she said, her voice steady, despite the flicker of apprehension in her chest. Thomas stepped closer, his hand brushing hers. "She's protective of me, June. She might need time." June offered a small smile, but her mind churned. She knew what it meant to be an outsider in a small town like this, where whispers followed her like shadows. A black woman, a former prodigy turned shopkeeper, now married to a man whose name carried weight in academic circles. She could already imagine the assumptions Lena might bring. June had faced them before. The raised eyebrows, the murmured doubts about her place, her worth. She'd learned to meet them with quiet strength, letting her work speak where words failed. As Thomas left to meet Lena at the bus station, June returned to the Steinway, her hands moving with practiced ease. She tightened a string, the note ringing clear and true. The shop felt alive, its walls holding the echoes of every piano she'd restored, every child she'd taught. She thought of Emma, of the other kids who'd found music through her gifts. This was her legacy, not the stages she'd left behind. But the thought of Lena lingered, a dissonant chord in her mind. June wasn't naive. She knew the girl's return could stir tensions she'd rather avoid. The door swung open again, and June looked up, expecting another customer. Instead, a young woman stood there, her posture rigid, her green eyes sharp with scrutiny. Lena Bennett was unmistakable. Tall, pale, with a cascade of dark hair, and an air of city-bred confidence. Her duffel bag hit the floor with a thud, and her gaze locked onto June, assessing, judging. "So," Lena said, her voice cutting through the shop's quiet hum, "you're the woman my dad married?" The words carried an edge, a challenge wrapped in politeness. June straightened, her expression calm but guarded. She'd faced looks like this before, eyes that saw her skin, her simple clothes, and assumed they knew her story. "I'm June Lawson," she said, her voice smooth, unwavering. "Good to meet you, Lena." Lena's lips twitched, not quite a smile, more a flicker of disdain. "Yeah," she said, her tone clipped. "Guess we'll see about that." She turned on her heel, leaving the bell jangling in her wake. June exhaled, her fingers resting on the piano's keys. The note lingered, soft but resolute, like her own heart. She didn't know what lay ahead with Lena, but she'd faced harder battles. For now, she'd keep tuning, keep teaching, keep building bridges with music, one note at a time. The morning light filtered through the shop's grimy windows, painting the rows of pianos in soft hues of amber. June Lawson knelt beside an old upright, its rosewood case scarred but sturdy, her hands deftly threading a new hammer into place. The rhythm of her work, tap, twist, test, was a quiet symphony, grounding her in the familiar hum of her sanctuary. Outside, the Ohio town stirred slowly, its streets alive with the chatter of early risers. But inside, June was alone with her thoughts, the weight of Lena Bennett's arrival still lingering like an unresolved chord. She tightened a screw, the faint creak of wood answering her touch. June Lawson had built this life from sacrifice, not ambition, and she wasn't about to let a young woman's scorn unravel her. The bell above the door jangled, sharp and insistent. June glanced up, expecting a customer, but Lena's silhouette filled the doorway, her posture stiff, her eyes glinting with purpose. The art student's boots clicked against the floor as she stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the cluttered workbenches and half-restored instruments. "So this is it?" Lena said, her voice laced with a condescension that cut through the shop's quiet. "This is where you... What, play at being a craftsman to cozy up to my dad?" June's fingers paused on the hammer, her expression calm, but her pulse quickening. She rose, wiping her hands on a rag, and met Lena's stare. "I restore pianos, Lena," she said evenly, "and I don't need to cozy up to anyone." Lena's lips curled into a smirk, her arms crossing tightly. "Right, because a piano shop in the middle of nowhere just happens to land you a music professor with a name everybody knows." The accusation hung heavy, sharp as a blade. June Lawson felt the familiar sting of being reduced to her skin, her circumstances, her choice to stay small when she could have been grand. She'd heard it before, in the sidelong glances of town gossips, in the polite skepticism of university. Colleagues who wondered how a woman like her ended up with Thomas Bennett. But June didn't flinch. "I don't need your father's name," she said, her voice steady, a quiet force. "I've got my own." Lena snorted, stepping closer, her eyes narrowing. "Your own? What, fixing broken keys for pocket change? Come on. You saw a chance with a lonely guy and took it." The words were venomous, each syllable a jab at June's pride. She could feel the heat of Lena's judgment, the assumption that her life, her shop, her flannel shirts, her lack of a diploma made her less. But June Lawson had faced worse than a young woman's anger. She thought of her brother Marcus, his frail hands clutching hers in the hospital, his dreams traded for her presence. She'd walked away from Juilliard for him, and she'd built this shop from nothing. Lena's words couldn't undo that. June set the rag down, her movements deliberate. "You don't know me, Lena," she said, her tone soft but unyielding. "You're welcome to think what you want, but this shop, this work, it's mine, and it's enough." Lena's smirk faltered, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly, tossing her hair. "Sure it is," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Must be real fulfilling, scraping by while my dad bankrolls your little hobby." June's jaw tightened, but she held her ground, her dark eyes steady. She could have told Lena the truth about the scholarship, the stages, the years spent proving herself in rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. But June Lawson didn't owe this girl her story. The bell chimed again, softer now, as Emma Carter slipped into the shop, her eyes bright with excitement. "Miss June, the school's ready for the piano," she said, oblivious to the tension. June's face softened, her focus shifting to the girl. "That's great, Emma," she said, her voice warm. "Let's get it loaded up." She moved to the upright, checking its tuning one last time, her hands steady despite the storm Lena had stirred. Emma chattered about her upcoming recital, and June listened, offering a nod or a smile, her presence a quiet anchor. Lena stood to the side, her arms still crossed, watching as June and Emma maneuvered the piano toward the door. Outside, a truck waited to deliver the instrument to the local elementary school, where it would find a new home in a classroom of eager kids. June supervised as two volunteers lifted the piano, her instructions clear and calm. Emma bounced on her toes, talking about how she'd play for her friends. "You made this happen, Miss June," she said, her voice full of awe. June smiled, brushing a hand over Emma's hair. "You're the one who'll make it sing," she said. The moment was small, but it carried the weight of June's purpose, giving music to those who needed it most. Lena lingered nearby, her expression unreadable, but June felt her eyes, sharp and probing, as if searching for a crack in her, resolve. As the truck pulled away, June turned back to the shop, her heart steady but heavy. Lena followed, uninvited, her boots scuffing the pavement. "So you just give pianos away?" Lena asked, her tone less biting now, tinged with something like curiosity. June nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "If they're going to kids, who'll play them, yeah?" Lena's brow furrowed, but she didn't respond, her silence louder than her earlier barbs. June Lawson knew that silence, knew it from years of being underestimated, of being seen as less than her worth. She'd learned to let her actions speak, to let the music she restored carry her truth. Back inside, June returned to her workbench, picking up a tuning fork. The shop was quiet again, save for the faint hum of a nearby piano. Lena hovered near the door, her posture less defiant now, but her eyes still held a challenge. "You're not what I expected," she said finally, her voice low, almost grudging. June glanced up, her expression calm but piercing. "Maybe you expected wrong," she said, striking the fork to test a note. The sound rang clear, a single, perfect pitch cutting through the tension. Lena turned and left, the bell's chime echoing in her wake. June exhaled, her fingers brushing the keys of the upright she'd been working on. She played a single chord, its resonance filling the shop. Lena's words stung, but they were familiar, echoes of a world that had always been quick to judge her. June Lawson had spent her life proving them wrong, not with arguments, but with the quiet strength of her craft. She thought of Thomas, of the music they shared, of the kids, like Emma, who carried her work forward. Lena's anger was just noise, a discord she'd learned to tune out. As the sun dipped lower, June returned to her work, her hands steady, her heart resolute, ready for whatever came next. The evening air carried a chill as June Lawson locked the piano shop's door, the faint jangle of keys echoing in the quiet Ohio street. She pulled her flannel jacket tighter, her breath visible in the dusk, and walked toward home, the weight of Lena Bennett's accusations still lingering like a stubborn shadow. June's boots crunched against the gravel, each step steady, grounding her against the storm of judgment she'd faced earlier that day. She had weathered such storms before, eyes that questioned her place, voices that doubted her worth. But Lena's words had struck a deeper chord, stirring memories June Lawson rarely let surface. Tonight, as the stars began to prick the sky, those memories demanded her attention. Inside the modest house she shared with Thomas Bennett, June found him in the living room, his fingers tracing the edges of a worn score of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. The lamplight cast soft shadows across his face, highlighting the lines etched by years of teaching and loss. June paused, her heart softening at the sight of him. A man whose love for music had drawn her in like a melody she couldn't resist. "Rough day?" Thomas asked, his voice gentle, sensing the tension in her silence. June settled beside him on the couch, her calloused hands resting in her lap. "Lena's got a lot to say," she replied, her tone even but tinged with weariness. "She thinks I'm playing a role to hide something." Thomas's brow furrowed, but June continued, her gaze drifting to the window where the town's lights flickered faintly. "She's not the first to assume," she said, her voice low, carrying the weight of years. "Back when I was playing, people saw a black girl with a piano and figured I was a fluke, not a prodigy." June Lawson's mind slipped back to those days, to the polished stages of New York, where she'd been 18, her fingers commanding concert halls with a fire that silenced doubters. She remembered the weight of her Juilliard acceptance letter, the thrill of being called a rising star in music journals. But she also remembered the whispers, critics who marveled at her talent but questioned her place in their world, audiences who clapped but stared as if she were an anomaly. "I had to be better than everyone else," June told Thomas, her voice steady but raw. "Not just to win, but to belong. Every note had to be perfect, every performance a proof." She thought of the nights spent practicing until her fingers ached, the days navigating rooms where she was the only one who looked like her. She'd played Brahms and Liszt with a precision that left critics scrambling for words. Her performances, featured in magazines that called her the future of classical piano. Yet the pressure to prove herself had been relentless, a silent demand woven into every applause. June Lawson had carried that weight, not because she wanted fame, but because music was her language, her truth. Thomas reached for her hand, his touch warm and grounding. "You never told me how hard it was," he said, his eyes searching hers. June offered a faint smile, her fingers curling around his. It wasn't about hard, she said. It was about love, for the music, for Marcus. Her brother's name brought a pang, sharp and familiar. She saw him in her mind's eye, a boy of 10, his laughter bright even as illness stole his strength. June had left Juilliard for him, trading concert halls for hospital rooms, her dreams for his comfort. When Marcus died, she'd poured her grief into this town, into her shop, into pianos that carried music to others. I didn't need the stage, she said softly. I needed to make something that lasted. The next morning, June was back in her shop, the air thick with the scent of varnish and wood. She worked on a spinet piano, its keys yellowed but salvageable, her focus a shield against the memory of Lena's scorn. The bell chimed, and Lena strode in, her expression a mix of defiance and curiosity. I looked you up, Lena said, her voice sharp, cutting through the shop's quiet hum. Juilliard, magazine covers, the whole deal. Why hide it? Why pretend you're just some small-town nobody? June set down her tuning wrench, her gaze steady. I'm not pretending, she said, her voice calm but firm. I'm living. This is who I am now. Lena's eyes narrowed, her hands on her hips. So what, you just gave up? Walked away from all that to play humble in a place like this? The words were a challenge, but June Lawson heard the doubt beneath them, the crack in Lena's certainty. She stepped closer to the spinet, her fingers brushing its keys. I didn't give up, she said, her tone measured. I chose. My brother needed me, and after he was gone, I chose to build something here. You can call it humble if you want, I call it mine. Lena's lips parted, but no words came, her confidence faltering under June's quiet conviction. June turned back to the piano, striking a note to test its pitch. The sound rang clear, a single truth in a world of noise. She thought of the children who'd play this instrument, of the music that would live on through them. Lena's accusations, her assumption that June was hiding her past to deceive, were just another hurdle, one June Lawson had cleared countless times. She'd faced skepticism from professors who doubted, her talent from audiences who questioned her presence. Each time she'd let her work answer, her music speak. As Lena lingered, June moved to another piano, checking its action with practiced ease. You don't get it, Lena said finally, her voice softer, almost grudging. You could have been somebody. June paused, her dark eyes meeting Lena's. I am somebody, she said, her words a quiet thunder. And I don't need your approval to know it. Lena turned and left, the door's doorbell ringing in her wake. June exhaled, her hands returning to her work, the spinet's keys cool under her touch. She played a soft chord, its resonance filling the shop. Lena's doubts, like the world's, would fade in time. June Lawson's truth, her music, her purpose, would endure. The lamplight in the Bennett house cast a warm glow across the living room, its soft edges barely reaching the corners where shadows clung to the walls. June Lawson sat beside Thomas Bennett at the old upright piano, its polished wood gleaming despite years of neglect. Her fingers, steady from decades of practice, guided his trembling hands through the opening measures of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. The notes stumbled, hesitant, as Thomas's brow furrowed in concentration, his once flawless technique now fraying at the edges. June's voice was gentle, a steady anchor. Slow down, Thomas, she murmured. Feel the rhythm, not the rush. Her dark eyes held a quiet patience, honed by years of tuning broken strings and broken spirits. June Lawson knew the weight of fragility, and tonight she carried it for the man she loved. The room was quiet, save for the piano's soft hum and the occasional creak of the house settling into the Ohio night. June adjusted Thomas's fingers, her touch light but firm, coaxing a smoother phrase from the keys. She'd spent months restoring this piano, salvaging it from a forgotten corner of the university's music department, its strings now singing with a clarity that belied its age. For Thomas, it was more than an instrument. It was a lifeline, a way to hold on to memories that were slipping like sand through his fingers. June Lawson had seen the signs early. The forgotten names, the missed beats, The moments when his eyes, clouded with confusion. She'd never pushed him to name it, but she'd known. And she'd acted, bringing music back into his life to anchor what was fading. Thomas paused, his hands resting on the keys, his shoulders slumping. "It's not the same," he said, his voice heavy with frustration. June's heart ached, but her expression remained steady. "It doesn't have to be," she said, her tone soft but resolute. "It just has to be you." She pressed a key, a single note ringing clear, and Thomas managed a faint smile, his fingers trying again. June Lawson had always believed music could hold things together. People, promises, pasts. She'd seen it in the children she taught, in the pianos she restored, and now, in the man beside her, fighting to keep himself whole. The door creaked, open, and Lena Bennett's silhouette appeared, her art student satchel slung carelessly over one shoulder. Her green eyes widened, catching the scene, her father's faltering hands, June's steady guidance. "Dad, what's going on?" Lena's voice was sharp, edged with a fear she couldn't mask. June's hands stilled, her gaze meeting Thomas's, a silent question passing between them. Thomas exhaled, his shoulders sagging further, and turned. To his daughter. "Lena," he said, his voice low, almost brittle. "I should have told you sooner. It's early dementia. I'm losing pieces." Lena's bag hit the floor with a thud, her face paling. "What?" she whispered, stepping closer, her eyes darting between her father and June. "Why didn't you tell me?" Thomas rubbed his temples, the gesture weary, familiar. "You were in New York building your life," he said. "I didn't want to pull you back with this." Lena's jaw tightened, her hands clenching at her sides. "So you told her?" Instead, the word carried a sting aimed at June, but June Lawson remained calm, her hands resting lightly on the piano. She'd felt the bite of Lena's judgment before, and she knew it wasn't about her. Not entirely. It was about a daughter's fear, a family's fracture. "Lena," Thomas said, his voice firm despite its tremble. "June's been helping me. She brought this piano back to life, got me playing again. It's keeping me here." He tapped his temple, his eyes distant but resolute. June watched Lena, her expression unreadable but her heart heavy. She'd spent her life proving herself to teachers, audiences, skeptics. But this was different. This wasn't about her worth. It was about Thomas's survival and Lena's pain. June Lawson did not need to defend her place, but she felt the weight of Lena's gaze, searching for a reason to hold on to her anger. Lena sank onto the couch, her hands twisting in her lap. "You're sick and you didn't tell me," she said, her voice breaking. "And she's, what, your savior now?" June's fingers twitched, but she stayed silent, letting Thomas answer. "June's my wife," he said, his tone steady, "and she's been here every day, helping me hold on to what I can." He gestured to the piano, its keys worn but warm under their touch. "She's not replacing anyone, Lena. She's giving me time." June Lawson rose from the bench, her movements graceful, deliberate. She crossed to the window, giving father and daughter space, her silhouette framed against the moonlit glass. She thought of her losses, Marcus, her brother, whose laughter she'd traded her dreams for, the stages she'd left behind to build something real. She'd never asked for Lena's approval, but she hadn't expected her resentment to cut so deep. June's hands, calloused from years of work, rested against the windowsill. She didn't need to justify her love for Thomas or the music she'd woven into his life. But Lena's pain was a mirror, reflecting the ache of a girl who felt her world slipping away. Lena's voice softened, almost a whisper. "How long have you known?" she asked, her eyes on her father. Thomas sighed, his hand still on the keys. "A year, maybe more. June noticed before I did." Lena's gaze flicked to June, a flicker of something new. Doubt, perhaps, or the first crack in her certainty. June Lawson turned, her dark eyes meeting Lena's, steady but not confrontational. She could have spoken, could have listed the nights spent tuning this piano. the hours guiding Thomas through scales to anchor his fading memories. But she didn't. Her silence was her strength, her work her answer. Alone in her shop later, that night, June sat at a bench, her fingers tracing the keys of a half-restored spinet. The town was asleep, the only sound the faint hum of her touch against the strings. She played Clair de Lune, its delicate notes unfolding like a confession. The music was her refuge, a place where judgment couldn't reach. June Lawson had faced Lena's accusations, the town's whispers, the world's doubts, and she'd answered them all with her hands, her heart. She thought of Thomas, his trembling fingers finding their way back to Chopin. Of Lena, her anger masking a fear. June understood too well. The melody rose, soft and unyielding, carrying June through the night. She didn't need Lena to see her truth. Not yet. For now, she'd keep playing, keep restoring, keep holding space for the music to heal what words could not. The late afternoon sun spilled through the open door of June Lawson's piano shop, bathing the cluttered space in a golden haze. The air buzzed with the chatter of children, their laughter mingling with the tentative notes of a Mozart minuet. June stood at the center of the room, her flannel sleeves rolled up, her braid slightly askew as she adjusted a young boy's posture at a freshly restored upright. Her hands, weathered from years of coaxing life from broken instruments, moved, with a quiet grace, guiding his fingers to the right keys. "Gentle now," June Lawson said, her voice warm, steady. "Let the notes sing for you." The boy grinned, his melody growing bolder, and June's heart lifted, a rare moment of lightness amid the tension that had shadowed her days. Today was special, a small recital for the children June taught, a chance for them to share the music she'd given them through her restored pianos. The shop, usually a haven of solitude, was alive with energy. Emma Carter, her eyes bright with pride, sat at a spinet, her fingers dancing through Eine kleine Nachtmusik, with a confidence that made June smile. Parents and neighbors crowded the room, their murmurs of approval a soft backdrop to the music. June Lawson moved among the children, offering nods of encouragement, her presence a quiet anchor. She'd spent weeks preparing for this, tuning each piano to perfection, ensuring every child had their moment to shine. This was her gift to the town, her way of proving that music belonged to everyone, not just those who could afford it. Outside, the Ohio street hummed with the rhythm of a small town winding down, bicycles whirring, distant lawnmowers buzzing. But inside the shop was a world of its own, a sanctuary where June Lawson's purpose thrived. She thought of the years she'd spent here, rebuilding pianos and lives, her hands carrying the weight of her sacrifices. The memory of her brother Marcus flickered in her mind. Not his illness, but his laughter, the way he'd hum along to her practice sessions. She'd given up Juilliard for him, and though that choice had cost her a stage, it had given her this, a legacy of music that reached beyond herself. The bell above the door chimed, and June glanced up to see Lena Bennett slip inside, her posture hesitant, her art student satchel slung low. Lena's green eyes scanned the room, lingering on the children, the pianos, and the community gathered in June's space. June Lawson felt the weight of that gaze but kept her focus on Emma, who finished her piece to a burst of applause. "That's girl," June said softly, resting a hand on Emma's shoulder. The girl beamed and June moved to the next student, her calm unshaken by Lena's presence. She knew Lena was watching, searching for something to fuel her doubts, but June had no intention of performing for her. Her work spoke for itself. As the recital continued, June overheard a parent whisper to another, "June gave that piano to the school. Didn't charge a dime." The words were a quiet validation, but June Lawson didn't need them. She'd faced enough skepticism in her life, about her talent, her choices, her place, to know that truth didn't require applause. Still, she caught Lena's expression shift, a flicker of surprise breaking through her guarded demeanor. June moved to a corner piano, helping a shy girl start her piece, her voice low and encouraging. The music flowed, imperfect but earnest, and June felt a swell of pride, not for herself, but for the children who carried her efforts forward. Later, as the recital wound down and parents mingled, Lena approached, her steps tentative. "You do this for free?" she asked, her voice low, lacking its usual edge. June Lawson wiped her hands on a rag, her dark eyes meeting Lena's with quiet steadiness. "Not for free," she said. "For them." She nodded toward the children, now laughing and comparing their performances. Lena's brow furrowed, her fingers tightening around her satchel. "I looked into you," she said, her tone softer, but still probing. "Why'd you give it all up, Juilliard, the concerts, everything, for this?" June paused, her hands resting on the piano's worn lid. She thought of Marcus, his frail hand in hers, his voice asking her to play one more song. She thought of the town, its children, and the pianos she'd saved from decay. "I didn't give anything up," June said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I chose my brother. And after he was gone, I chose this, making sure kids like Emma have what I had, even if just a piece of it." Her words were a melody, deliberate and clear, carrying the weight of a life built on purpose. Lena's eyes flickered, a crack in her armor, but she said nothing, her silence heavy with unspoken questions. June Lawson turned away, helping a child pack up sheet music, her movements fluid, unhurried. She didn't need Lena's understanding, but she saw the shift in the girl's gaze, the way it lingered on the pianos, the children, the community June had built. Later, as the crowd thinned, Lena lingered by a restored grand piano, her fingers brushing its keys. She played a halting phrase from Satie's Gymnopédie No. 1 Fern, the notes soft, almost reverent. June watched from across the room, her heart stirring. She stepped closer, her presence quiet but inviting, and nodded. "Keep going," she said, her voice a gentle nudge. Lena hesitated, then continued, the melody tentative but growing. June sat beside her, not playing, just listening, her hands folded in her lap. The music was a bridge, fragile but real, spanning the gap between them. June Lawson didn't speak, didn't push. She'd learned long ago that some truths needed time to settle, like dust after a storm. She thought of Thomas, his trembling hands finding Chopin again, of the children, their laughter echoing through her shop. This was her strength, not in proving herself to Lena, but in creating space for music to heal, to connect. As Lena's notes faded, June offered a small nod, a silent acknowledgement. The girl looked at her, not with warmth, but with something new. Curiosity, perhaps, or the first stirrings of respect. June Lawson stood, returning to her work, the shop's quiet hum wrapping around her like a familiar song, ready for whatever notes came next. The sun dipped low over the Ohio horizon, painting the piano shop in hues of amber and rose. June Lawson stood by the open door, the evening breeze carrying the scent of pine and the distant hum of the town settling into dusk. Inside, the shop was a quiet haven, its walls resonating with the ghosts of melodies played by children's hands. A single grand piano, its varnish gleaming from June's meticulous care, sat at the center, its keys catching the fading light. June's fingers brushed the wood, her touch reverent, as if greeting an old friend. She'd spent years breathing life into instruments like this, and today she sensed a different kind of harmony waiting to unfold. June Lawson was no stranger to mending what was broken, not just pianos, but connections, hearts, and truths. Lena Bennett lingered near the grand, her posture less rigid than before, her fingers hovering over the keys. The air between them held a fragile tension, not hostile but uncharted, like the opening notes of an unfamiliar piece. "Mind if I try something?" Lena asked, her voice soft, almost tentative. June's dark eyes met hers, steady and open. "Go ahead," she said, stepping back, her flannel shirt rustling faintly. Lena sat, her fingers testing a phrase from Sadie's Gymnopédie No. 1, its delicate notes unfolding like a sigh. June Lawson watched, her heart stirring at the sound. She'd heard the piece countless times, but in Lena's hands, It carried a new weight, a question, a reaching. June slid onto the bench beside Lena, her presence quiet but deliberate. "Want to make it a duet?" she asked, her voice low, inviting. Lena's fingers paused, her green eyes flickering with hesitation, then resolve. "Yeah," she said, a single word carrying more than she could say. June nodded, her hands finding their place on the keys, and together they began, their notes weaving a delicate tapestry. The melody was slow, its rhythm a heartbeat, each phrase a step toward something unspoken. June Lawson played with a grace honed by years of loss and love, her fingers steady where Lena's faltered, guiding without overtaking. The music was their language, a dialogue where words had failed. Thomas Bennett appeared in the doorway, his tweed jacket loose on his frame, his eyes bright with a clarity June hadn't seen in weeks. He leaned against the frame, watching silently, his face softening as the duet filled the shop. June caught his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. She'd spent months helping Thomas hold on to his music, his memories, and now she saw him finding joy in this moment, his wife and daughter side by side, their hands creating something whole. June Lawson felt the weight of that joy, a warmth that settled deep in her chest, but she kept her focus on the keys, letting the music carry them forward. Lena's playing grew bolder, her notes finding their place alongside June's, the duet gaining strength. The shop seemed to hum with it, the walls echoing their harmony. June Lawson thought of the children she'd taught, the pianos she'd restored, each one a bridge to someone's future. This moment, though, was different, personal, raw. She didn't need Lena's forgiveness or approval. She'd never sought it. But in the music, she felt a shift, a softening, as if Lena was seeing her, not as an intruder, but as a woman who'd chosen love over ambition, who'd built a life from sacrifice. June's fingers moved with quiet certainty, her heart steady, anchored by the melody they shared. Thomas stepped closer, his voice breaking the silence as the final notes faded. "June doesn't replace your mother, Lena," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "She's helping me hold on to what you love. About me." He smiled, a rare lightness in his eyes, and June felt a pang of gratitude for his words, for the way he saw her. Lena's hands lingered on the keys, her expression unreadable but softer, the sharp edges of her anger dulled. June Lawson rose. From the bench, her movements fluid, and began tidying a nearby workbench, giving Lena space to process. She didn't need words to know the duet had changed something, however small. Outside, the town glowed under the twilight, its streets alive with the soft murmur of evening. June opened the shop's windows, letting the music spill out, its notes mingling with the breeze. Children passing by paused, their laughter blending with the echo of Satie's melody. Emma Carter, clutching her sheet music, waved through the window, her grin wide. June waved back, her heart full. This was her world, music, community, purpose, and she'd fought to carve it out, against doubts and judgments that had followed her like shadows. June Lawson didn't need to prove herself to Lena, but the duet had been an offering, a chance for connection. Lena stood, her satchel slung over her shoulder, but she didn't leave. "That was nice," she said, her voice quiet, almost shy. June nodded, her dark eyes warm but unguarded. "It was," she said, her words simple, carrying no demand. Lena lingered a moment longer, then stepped outside, the bell chiming softly behind her. June Lawson watched her go, the shop settling into its familiar quiet. She sat back at the grand, her fingers tracing the keys, playing a single chord that resonated through the room. The sound was clear, resolute, a testament to her strength. Thomas joined her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "You're something else, June," he said, his voice thick with affection. She smiled, leaning into his touch. "Just doing what I do," she said, her tone light but grounded. The shop's open door let the evening air drift in, carrying the faint laughter of children, the hum of a town alive with small moments. June Lawson closed her eyes, letting the chord linger, its resonance a promise. She'd built this life, note by note, choice by choice, and in this moment, with the music still echoing, she knew it was enough. And so, the notes of June Lawson's story linger, a melody of resilience, music, and quiet reconciliation. We hope this tale of breaking barriers and finding harmony has touched your heart as much as it has ours. What did you feel listening to June's journey? Did her strength or the duet with Lena spark something in you? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear how this story resonated and where you're joining us from. Your support keeps these stories alive, so hit that subscribe button for more tales that inspire and connect. Thank you for sharing this moment with us, for letting June's music fill your evening. Until next time, keep listening, keep feeling, and let's meet again in the next story, where new chords of hope and understanding await. Stay tuned.